Hello, I'm State Representative Roger Bruce, and I represent District 61, which includes Fulton County, Douglas County, and Cobb County. And I want to welcome you to this week's edition of Under the Gold Dome. I have two of my colleagues with me today, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
I am State Representative Sandra G. Scott, the Vice Chair of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus. I represent District 76, which is Clayton and Henry County.
Hello, I'm State Representative Karen Bennett, representing House District 94, which serves parts of DeKalb and Gwinnett counties.
Okay. And this week, as you know, we talk about just things that have happened down here at the Capitol. This has been kind of a quiet week because of all of the weather issues that we've had, but there's still work going on as relates to the budget, and there are meetings going on every day about what's happening with that. And in future programs, we will share information about the budget. But today, we want to talk about a couple of topics that are really important. One has to deal with hate crimes. As you know, because we're in close proximity to the airport and we have all kinds of things going on, one of the problems is that we're not paying attention to what's happening to people based on the color of their skin, based on their gender, based on their sexual, all these other things. There's a lot of things happening simply because of hate. And my understanding is that you have some legislation to try to address this issue. Why don't you talk about it?
I do, Representative Bruce. Thank you for that opportunity. I'm sponsoring on behalf of the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus House Bill 663, Violent Hate Crimes Act. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are people paying attention, but because there's no laws on the book to support offenders, to support the prosecutors, mm-hmm. Then there's not a good tracking mechanism.
So talk to us about exactly what the bill does.
What the bill does is makes it a crime for persons who commit crimes basically because of biases, mm-hmm. or prejudices or differences that they find amongst other people. There's a difference in committing a crime, and then there's another difference in committing a hate-motivated crime. Mm-hmm. And so what this does is allow the government, the prosecutors, to identify those type of crimes that are committed against persons based on someone's actual hate or disregard for them.
And how is that measured? How do we know what somebody's motive is? You know, somebody goes out and they do things and we say, you should not have done this, you know. How do you know that it's actually based on hate?
The challenge is that any type of offense is hate.
Well, that would be my thought too. So you killed somebody, you probably didn't like them.
Didn't like them very much, or sometimes the hate is not necessarily something that presents itself just because someone makes a crime. But when we can identify certain groups mm-hmm. That are targeted based on their race, religion, their creed, their color, their sexual origin, their sexual preference, and the prosecutors can prove that the crime was intentionally targeted at groups of people because of that and because of their dislike for that, that constitutes hate crime.
But what happens in our environment right now with a president in the White House who, by his actions and his comments, he's almost kind of endorsing some of these things. I remember he was giving a speech or something and he was going to get I won't say what he said, out of the room, you know, and but he is actually seeming to bring these people who hate to the surface. And is that a defense? You know, well, the president said it's okay for me to feel this way. How are we dealing with all of this stuff?
Well, in Georgia, it's difficult to track that because we don't have any hate crime laws on the book. There's no opportunity for the crimes to be reported. So crimes could be happening each and every day mm-hmm. that are hate motivated or not. Mm-hmm. But we are unable to track those crimes that are perpetrated against individuals or citizens based on their particular group that they may associate themselves with. And I want to also add physical disability, emotional disability is another group that's targeted. People are perpetrating crimes against certain groups because they just don't like this group. Mm-hmm. And in regard to your comment or question about the president, 45. let's just say that he's been on the opposite side of the debate.
Right.
He has supported white supremacist group.
Right.
He supported Ku Klux Klan. And yet, come after the fact, it seems to be an afterthought when he wants to talk about all citizens.
So has this legislation or any legislation like this been passed in other states?
Actually, this legislation, hate crime legislation, has been passed in 45 other states.
Okay.
Georgia is one of the few that has not passed it, but let me make a correction. In the year 2000, there was hate crime legislation that was passed by the Georgia House of Representatives as well as the Senate. And 4 years later, the Supreme Court of Georgia determined that it was unconstitutional because it did not describe biases or prejudices.
Okay.
And so it was basically the intent of the Georgia lawmakers to actually prosecute and persecute people performing offenses because of hate. But we come around to a technicality, if you would.
I got you.
And so this House Bill 663 intends to just kind of get rid of that technicality and just
Okay.
describe exactly what prejudices are.
Okay. Now, I know all of us have this issue in our districts. No matter where you live, you'll be affected by this type of legislation. What are you hearing from your constituents on this subject?
Well, I think it's something that we definitely need in all areas of Georgia as well as throughout the United States. My constituents feel that hate crime do exist. We have seen cases that we would consider hate crimes, and so we are just happy to know that we are going forward with this legislation, and we want this legislation to be heard all over the state of Georgia so that our constituents and the people of Georgia will know that we have a hate crime bill that is coming out that would identify the crime as a hate crime.
And what is the punishment associated with this?
Well, the punishment is not one of the things that we don't want to do is impose mandatory or minimums, mandatory maximums.
Yeah, I have difficulty with any kind of mandatory sentencing myself.
So the way that the bill is written is that it allows the judge some latitude
Okay.
in imposing the crime within the already statutory limits for such offenses.
Okay. And what is I'm sure I've been down here a long time, and I don't care what it is, how good it is, always somebody against it. What are you hearing from the opposition to this bill? Anything?
Well, I'm hearing that battery and aggravated assault is already a crime.
Yeah.
And there are those who feel that we should not identify or impose the identification of hate. There are those who feel that by virtue of just of making a crime, of doing an offense, that's hate in and of itself, especially when it comes to murder or some type of other violent crime.
But as I sit here and I listen, that's not actually a totally accurate statement. People commit murder sometimes on the spur of the moment. Something just happened or whatever. But what you're talking about, and what I think all of us are talking about, is hate based on a philosophy. And again, I don't mind calling them out. The Ku Klux Klan and others, they hung people and did things to people simply because of the color of their skin or their religion or whatever the case may be. Those are the hate crimes that we're talking about, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, once again,
Not a crime of passion.
No, it's not a crime of passion.
Yeah, this is a crime where
it's
they
a crime
thought
of
about
hate,
of hate.
and it's a crime that can be identified as targeted against a group of people or individuals just based on their preferences or their lifestyle.
Okay, so as we wrap this topic up, what is the message that you want to send to everybody as to how they can help us with this legislation?
All Georgia citizens have senators and representatives that represent them. The best way to help is to contact their senators and their legislators, their House, their representatives, and let them know that they expect for them or would like for them to support House Bill 663.
Okay. Any last comment on that topic?
Yes, I agree with Representative Bennett. and that we are asking for all legislators to send out newsletters to their constituents, and that we are starting to set up a tour across Georgia to let the people of Georgia know that we, the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, are going to push this hate crime legislation, and we are going to push it across the state of Georgia to let the citizens know that we are against any crimes that target a set of individuals. And so that is how we plan to get this bill out. That is how we plan to get it to the surface of the House of Representatives and the Senate here in the state of Georgia, by getting our constituents involved in this process.
You know, I might be dating myself in terms of age here, but I remember when I was in high school, and this was back in the 60s. And it was right after the Civil Rights Bill and all of those things came into play. And I went to a all-black Catholic military high school, which is kind of interesting in of itself. And but it was Catholic and military. It was really weird because by day they were teaching me how to love my brother and at night how to kill him. But it was kind of a weird situation. But but right after all that passed, you know, the school was in Virginia, and most of the kids that went there were from New York, Pennsylvania, you know, the northern cities. And but they were afraid for us to ride on the bus. Back then you had the Greyhound and you had the other one, I forget what the other one was, Trailways. And but they didn't want us to ride on those buses, so they chartered buses for us to be able to get back home. And there was a place along the route where the buses stopped. You know how you had a bus, the stations. And we pulled into that thing, and we were sitting at the counter. And there were people standing behind us that they basically ignored us sitting at the counter and were waiting on the people that were standing behind us. And eventually they just said, y'all can sit here all day long. We're not going to serve you. We're not going to even acknowledge that you're there. So, you know, do you mind getting up because you're taking up the seats? That's basically what happened. That's hate. That is, in the law back then, and it still does, says that you have to serve people in these public accommodations. And but now it's gone further. Back then they just hung you, they killed you, they did whatever they wanted to do, and they got away with it. Over the course of time, there were some laws that came into place that made it a little more difficult to just go out and hang somebody or whatever. But they found other ways now to do the same thing. They just found other ways to do it. And this legislation addresses these other ways that they found to do it. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, it's accurate. And let me just also say that hate crime in and of itself is terrorism. It's a form of terror. And if certain perpetrators of crime can instill fear into the lives of citizens, then that's a form of terrorism. All citizens in Georgia deserve the right to feel safe and free from attack because they're different. So thank you for the opportunity to come and present this hate crime legislation. It certainly is needed, and it will go a long ways to just sending a message that Georgians will not tolerate this type of crime, any type of crime.
And we need to get everybody involved in this thing.
Everybody involved.
Okay, now you have some other legislation that you wanted to talk about as well. Why don't you share that with us?
Yes, as a veteran in the United States Army, I am looking at legislation for veterans because, as you all know, we have a lot of homeless veterans here in the state of Georgia, and I don't think that any veteran should be homeless. So I have legislation this year that will require housing authorities to develop and implement policies granting housing preference to veterans who are homeless. And that is basically what the bill will do. We know that we have a lot of housing authorities throughout Atlanta and throughout the state of Georgia, and we want them to give preference to veterans that are homeless because no veteran should be homeless in the state of Georgia.
And when you say give preference, what is that? How does that?
You know, just like where we have veterans receive preference when they go and apply for jobs, like give them they have a point system when they start looking at housing, just like the Section 8 programs and any of the programs that they have in the nonprofit organization have that help people with housing. We're asking for them to give preference to our homeless veterans.
Okay, now and I agree with you. We should, in fact, make sure that nobody should be out there. But how do you, square it up, so to speak? If you have 3 people out there, and one of them is a veteran, but you got 2 other people that are, in fact, homeless, they need help too. So how do we not help all 3 of them?
Well, I would love for us to be able to help all 3 of them, but my legislation is basically dealing with veterans because veterans, these soldiers have gone to war, not 1 time, 2 times, a lot of them 3 and 4 times. And they come back, they are not able to work. And we know with the problems with the VA, it takes so long for veterans to receive their benefits. And in the process, a lot of them go homeless. So again, I don't think that any veteran should be on the street for homeless, and I don't think anyone else should be on the street as being homeless. I would love for the state of Georgia to come up with a way that we will have no veterans on the street. And this is not the only piece of legislation I have. I also have another bill that asking the lottery to create a ticket for veterans, and proceeds from that ticket will go to help pay for housing for homeless veterans. So my focus is definitely on military veterans because, again, I don't think any veteran should be homeless in the state of Georgia or anywhere.
So how do we address this whole issue? What do you think about that? You know, I know she's focused on veterans, and I agree. No veteran should be on the street, especially if they've been out and they've served their country. Some of them have died, some of them come back, limbs missing. So I get it. But I'm also concerned about the other people on the street too.
I get it.
How do we deal with this issue in its entirety?
I get it. It's a disgrace for America and for Georgia to have any homeless people, hungry people, people without health care. So we just have to work harder. I applaud Representative Scott for her interest in veterans. I, too, have a work opportunity tax credit piece of legislation, which would give employers tax credits for hiring hard-to-place veterans. So, yes, we have to give honor to our veterans who have served our country and find ways to eradicate homelessness all over the state of Georgia, and I would dare say all over the country.
Yeah.
When the federal government is looking at spending trillions of dollars to erect a wall,
Yeah, that's crazy.
I think that it behooves us to think that every American should have affordable health care
Right.
and housing.
You know, it's interesting because I'm sure you guys have seen the same thing. When we walk out of this building and we're walking over to the depot, and we walk past people who are in front of a church and in front of the state capitol living on the street. We go over there to these different events that are across there at the depot. And I have, on occasion, brought food from there and tried to give it to some of these, and well, in fact, gave it to some of the people that are there. Because, I mean, it's hard for me to do that. But now I'm hearing that there's not legislation, but that there are ordinances popping up, and I don't know if Atlanta has one or not, that says that you are in violation of the law if you feed people who are hungry on the street. Have you heard that?
Yes, the city of Atlanta did pass an
Was it?
ordinance.
I didn't know if it was Atlanta. Was one
Yes,
of them.
yes, it is Atlanta, where they will fine you $100. You will have to pay $100 for going out and feed the homeless. And I know that we sit here and we cannot understand why would you not want the homeless to be fed. But they have been marching. They have been having congregations that say that they are going to continue to feed the homeless because that is what we're here for, to help the people. And when our people are suffering, we are suffering. And
Do we know what's the underlying factor? What's the basis, the purpose of that ordinance? Do you know?
I don't really know the purpose of it. Why would they come up with an ordinance that would fine people for feeding the homeless when we know that it has been going on for years, where people come down from different churches and different organizations and set up and feed the homeless on the weekend and not every day. But I am glad to say that the people have not stopped feeding the homeless.
That's good.
And they will not stop feeding the homeless
well, I'm
because
sure there's
that is their mission, and that is what God have called them to do.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some kind of reason. I'm just not sure what it is. So we probably need to invite somebody from the city council to come over and talk about that, because I'd like to know what the answer to that question is. What the resolution is.
Take away the opportunity for faith-based organizations and caring people and other organizations to come and help the homeless, then we should understand what would be the basis for a policy that would prevent
Yeah,
that.
my suspicion is I don't know if the thought process is that, if you feed them, they'll stay or whatever. But the reality is that, people got to eat,
Not pigeons.
Yeah.
But
And I
the-
agree.
Not pigeons.
Well, I agree with you. And
But that should send a message to us when we want to stop us from feeding the homeless. Let us know that we need to provide them with a place to stay, and then we won't have the homeless.
Exactly.
And that we need to provide jobs for people and to help people and get them some type of training and education so that they will not be on the street. And eventually they'll be able to pay their way, and they will not be hungry, and they will not be on the streets.
Right.
So it's a lot of work to be done when it comes to homelessness, not just for military veterans, but for people in general. We have a lot of work to do, and I know that we're looking forward to trying to find ways to help all the citizens of Georgia so that we will not have any homeless people on the street.
Okay. Well, we get ready to wrap it up. And I appreciate you guys coming out. We got a lot of topics. We could sit here and talk all day long. And as I said earlier, this week everybody's working on the budget. And I know it's going to be a big battle over who gets what in that budget. Any thoughts real quick on how, folks that you represent are going to be impacted by this budget coming up? Real quick. Anything?
Well, what I hope that we have in the budget is money to help us expand Medicaid, because we continue to have people with no health care. We continue to have hospitals closing in rural Georgia, and we need to, first of all, expand Medicaid, and we need to make sure that our people have health care. And then we need to also look at education. Education always number one, always with top priority. It's so much that we could talk about education, and definitely the way and the salaries that our pre-K teachers make. It was said yesterday that their salary, they're only making like $16,000 a year as a pre-K teachers. We got to look at ways of paying our teachers to educate our children. So it's just so much that we could talk about, and I hope that we see more money in the budget for education, as well as, I say, health care, because we know that that is a need and a must. So those are the two things that I would like to see more money added to in the budget, as well, again, taking care of our homeless.
Okay.
I
Anything?
would tend to agree. I would add to that also is public safety.
Okay.
We've got a great need in our public safety systems as well.
Okay. Well, we're going to all be out battling for our little piece of this $25 billion that we have to divvy up. And we'll be reporting, weekly about where that money is going and things like that. So thanks again. I appreciate you guys being part of this. We're all in this fight together. The purpose of this, again, is for us to keep people informed about what's happening under the Gold Dome.
Thank you so much, Representative Bruce, for what you do.
Thank you.